Hey everybody, welcome back to All Fiction is Fantasy. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, I know it's been a while. It's been a couple weeks since we've had a video, but I have been reading and I am recording a few reviews and videos today. So we'll have some new stuff in the next few weeks. So today we are going to review Gardens of the Moon, the first book of Malazan, Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson, originally published in 1999. So let's give some context here. Adding my opinion to the sea of opinions on the Malazan series feels like spitting into the ocean and expecting it to make a difference. But spit I must, so here it goes. I don't typically enjoy works of epic fantasy. I prefer shorter series, short stories, short novels, and novellas when it comes to my fantasy reading. To split genre hairs, I typically prefer sword and sorcery and heroic fantasy over epic fantasy. I have dabbled in epic fantasy, of course, being a child of the 80s. There was, of course, Lord of the Rings, which I read. The first few books of the Shannara series, the Sword of Shannara, the Elfstones of Shannara, and one other, Scion of Shannara, possibly. The first couple Wheel of Time books I read, the first Mistborn book, the first A Song of Ice and Fire book, and then also a handful of Forgotten Realms books. Of course, the original Dragonlance trilogy, and then I followed that up with the Twins trilogy and the Icewind Dale trilogy, and then the original few trilogy, I think it was, of the Drizzt books. And of those, the only ones I really remember fondly and still enjoy are the Forgotten Realms books. I'm just not a big fan of epic fantasy. I've always been curious about the Malazan books. They have intriguing titles. The old mass markets have great classic fantasy covers. Erikson based his stories on his own tabletop RPG games and campaigns, and I think that's a fantastic idea, same as the original Dragonlance trilogy. I know his group originally started with D&D, but then they moved to Gerps, the generic universal role-playing system from Steve Jackson, and I have a big soft spot in my heart for Gerps because that was one of, if not the first non-TSR RPG I played back in the 80s. My two closest reading buddies, they love the Malazan series. They talk about it all the time. I trust their opinions, even though we don't always see eye to eye on every book. I am giving them the benefit of the doubt and reading the series. So I bought an entire collection of the old mass markets and to give it a try. And after reading Gardens of the Moon, I could sum up my opinions with I didn't love it, at least not on the whole. There were parts that I really loved, really loved. There were parts that I didn't like at all. But I liked it enough to continue with the series. And because this series is so long, something like 10,000 plus pages, I'm going to give it 3 full books before I commit either way. So summing up the plot of Gardens of the Moon is both simple and impossible. It's a weird dichotomy there. The book is basically a big setup for all the players who will for what will surely become a grand and epic major world-altering conflict. We have at the center of Gardens of the Moon, we have the Bridge Burners. And hey, let's face it, the Bridge Burners are ripped straight out of the pages of the Black Company of Glenn Cook's book series. I cannot emphasize that enough. More than anything, this feels like an expanded Black Company book. The members of the Bridge Burners, they are a group of mercenary-like soldiers who often bend the rules of engagement to accomplish their goals. They have names like Sorry, Whiskey Jack, Quick Ben, Hedge, Fiddler, Mallet, and so on. Calum. The Black Company, of course, has Croaker, Mercy, Silent, Tom Tom, Otto, Elmo, Goblin, Raven, and so on. And the similarities are more than just the kind of names, the kind of code names that the members use. The Bridge Burners, the Black Company, the Bridge Burners, they work for the Malazan Empire. And along with them, we have the Empress's main right hand, Lorne. She kind of commands this group of the Claw. They're like the Secret Service type organization, or they work hand in hand. In the book, the Claw is mainly represented by a character named Topper. The Empire sends the bridge burners to a grand, huge city, the city of Darujistan, on a top secret mission, probably to their doom. One of the members of the bridge burners is possessed by a god of death, maybe kind of. And the captain, their new captain, is also working in tandem with a set of twin gods. In Darujistan, there are warring factions of assassins and thieves who have battles on the city rooftops. The city is absolutely corrupted by political turmoil. Near the city is a burial ground of an ancient, ultra-powerful entity whom the Empire wants to resurrect, possibly to do battle with an elder race of beings who live in a floating city called Moonspawn. Now, Moonspawn and its inhabitants have recently destroyed one of the Empire's main cities, and now Moonspawn hovers above the city of Darujistan. Moonspawn is governed by a god named Rake, and there's also within its walls are a giant race of COVID and draconic beings. And also there are a dozen gods who come in and out who maybe are immortal, maybe aren't immortal. They are super powerful. There is a pack of demonic hellhounds who hunt people on these roads, on these interdimensional roads. All of these people, all of these factions are fighting. For what? We don't really know yet. That is not set up. What is set up that the seeds are being planted for the conflict, and we are learning as we go. And here's where the book will either grab you or completely lose you. There is almost no out of context world building or plot exposition in Gardens of the Moon. The reader does not have a surrogate in the book learning about things along with the reader. The reader is dropped headfirst into the middle of a super complex plot with thousands of years of history and just expected to hold on for dear life and get it. And there is a lot of stuff that we just don't get because we don't have the context right now to get it. But from what I hear, context is revealed over time, and eventually Erikson makes sense of it all. The magic system is super complex, but Erikson doesn't take time to explain it. He's not concerned with wowing his readers with his inventive and complex system of magic. Although I think players of Warhammer Fantasy will have a better time understanding what is presented in Gardens of the Moon. And that's another thing that this book reminds me a lot of is Warhammer Fantasy battles. I could really see this being a Warhammer book or something published by the Black Library. So I don't typically enjoy out of context world building and exposition, what they call info dump. But with Gardens of the Moon, I could have used a little bit more. The first couple of chapters are really, really rough. I think they're a really poor introduction into this world. They're not inviting at all. Had I picked this up on a whim, I probably would not have continued reading past those first few chapters. So the book was originally written as a screenplay and then adapted and readapted into the novel that we have today. And I think that shows there is kind of a there's a missing visual element to help the reader keep track of things. And there are so many things to keep track of. There are so many named characters. I think there's something like 92 named characters. It's crazy. Typically, I like at most about a dozen named characters in my stories. Some of the characters even have multiple names. Then there are all of the made-up races and ancestries. There are native peoples who have inhabited the lands for thousands of years, and you just know that Erikson has all of these complex histories for each one of these memorized. And then there are all of the gods. The divine presence in Malazan leaves no room for atheists. I often wonder about atheism in works of fantasy where the gods make themselves known. You know, in a world of Dungeons and Dragons, could you play a character as an atheist? I don't think you could play a character as an agnostic in this kind of world because the gods they manipulate and they make their presence known all of the time. And that's something that I think about. It's an interesting concept. So I'm wondering, if that kind of thing does get explored in the Malazan series, because the gods are super active. However, the gods are also mortal, possibly. Some are just men or women who have ascended into godhood. Perhaps some of them are elder beings. Can they die? I think some of them can die. They actively manipulate the people of Malazan, and they take sides and fight with them and fight against them. The divine presence, the hand of the divine is very strongly felt in this world. The book's peoples, places, history, geography, and mythology is like an onion with infinite layers. And Erikson is constantly pulling back these layers to reveal more and more and more. There are named characters and entire factions that are introduced just in the last couple of pages, in the last couple of chapters of this book. However, it's not just a series of questions without answers. Slowly, along the way, I did start to understand some of it, at least the parts that Erikson wanted me to understand at that moment. And I did start to really enjoy it. I get the sense that Erikson is not here to explain things to me as the reader. He will reveal things to me as the reader when it is the appropriate time to do so. And so I think having trust in him is kind of the theme of this review. And he has I think he has done a good job of establishing that trust with Gardens of the Moon. So I loved a lot of the characters. I really loved two characters in particular, and those are the characters of Perrin and Tattersail. Perrin is a great character, and he totally subverted my expectations of where he would end up. And Tattersail, one of the Empire's mages, one of their battle wizards, is a wonderfully written character, and I can't wait to see what happens to her, because boy howdy, does something crazy happen to her towards the end of the book, and I can't wait to see where that ends up. And then there are the big epic set pieces. There's a battle on the rooftops of Durisan between two of the bridge burners, Calum and Quick Ben, and a group of mage assassins and thieves that is truly spectacular. I can just picture that in my head being a huge major kind of set piece for the screenplay version, for the film version of this. There are actually quite a few awesome battles of sorcery. Magic is really commonplace in this world, and that's something that I do like. I like fantasy with a lot of magic, a lot of weirdness. There are also some incredible swords and weapons in this book. There is a sword that can negate the power of magic. There is a sword that might be a god. There are demon hounds who hunt in packs, and there is a wizard who gets turned into a puppet. And let's talk about that for a minute. So I read some criticism of this book while I was reading it. I liked, when I'm reading kind of a complex work of fiction, I like to read about it while I am reading it. I read reviews and I read information. I read Wikipedia articles. I am never concerned with spoilers, really. But one of the main things I read, one of the main points of criticism I read about the Malazan series as a whole and about Gardens of the Moon particularly, is that it is a book that takes itself way too seriously. Erikson was trying to write a super serious work of serious fantasy, and it suffers under the weight of its own lofty seriousness. And to that I say, huh? What? This book is really funny. It's kind of wacky. It's weird. Seriously, there is a wizard character who at the beginning of the book, about 50 pages in, he gets turned into a puppet. I mean, straight out of like the Puppet Master movies. I imagined him looking something like, was it Mr. Blade, the puppet with the hat and the trench coat and the blade hands. And as the puppet character is slowly losing its mind, he's jumping around from one magical dimension to another and just wreaking havoc everywhere. The moment where he becomes a puppet was the moment that I was fully on board with this book. That's something that I really enjoy, that just kind of weirdness. There's also a character who is part of some elder race of undead warriors, who is basically Marvin the paranoid android from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in zombie form. At one point, Lorne, the Empress's right hand, the undead character's name is Tool, and she asks Tool what he thinks about, and Tool says futility. And then Lorne asks if other members of his people think, and he answers no. Why? because it's futile. It's just, there's a lot of comedy in the book. There's a lot of funny dialogue, and there are at least a dozen times where I laughed out loud while reading Gardens of the Moon. I think people who see this as a totally serious work of serious fantasy are also the same kind of people who don't realize that Warhammer 40K is pure satire. I remember watching a shut up and sit down review for a Warhammer game, a Warhammer 40K game. And they were talking about how grimdark it is and how serious it is and how it promotes ideas of fascism. And I'm like, guys, seriously, please tell me you understand that Warhammer 40K is a work of satire. There are people who criticize 40K for being too grimdark and too serious, not knowing that it is a work of pure satire. It's a satirical look at the absurdity of never-ending conflict taken to an insane and extreme galactic scale. And I get the same sense that Erikson is also working in kind of a satirical mode with Gardens of the Moon, of examining fantasy conflict in kind of a different way. Ultimately, Gardens of the Moon is a fun book full of action, interesting characters, weird magic, creatures, elder races, gods, and all manner of things battling for control of something. They've probably lost their purpose. They've probably forgotten why they're even fighting. Maybe we'll find out. Maybe we won't. But one thing is for certain, Erikson isn't just going to come out and tell the reader what it's all about. That part of the work is up to us, the readers. And so far, I'm willing to do that work, as long as I have some help from the various Wikipedias on the internet. So, all right, you guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this review of Gardens of the Moon. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye.